Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I think, can you guys hear me? This is fuzzy. I think last time the Cubs won the World Series, the Titanic was seaworthy. That's one of my favorite references. But no, it's great to be here for a variety of reasons. One, I was just in Iceland, so I'm enjoying the weather here. And more importantly, I think it's great that conferences and forums like this are starting to exist, and the academic community is sort of getting hip to sports, and that it's no longer sort of considered the toy department. So it's great to be here, great to be speaking to all of you. I'm going to try and talk a little on this PowerPoint, but as Siddharth said, I'm a writer at Sports Illustrated, and I'm just the media guy here today. I feel like the warm-up act, because the heavy lifting and the academics who've done the real robust research are following. But no, I have a great interest in these topics, and I've been at Sports Illustrated for about 15 years now, which is hard to believe, and do a fair amount of TV. And some of my colleagues have one particular sport. They're the football guy or they're the baseball guy, and I sort of jump around a little bit, and I put together this PowerPoint. I've been at Princeton this year, and finally have gotten hip to the PowerPoint. One of my students said it's like garage band for propeller heads, but I've had fun learning PowerPoint, and so I put this together. I cover everything from sort of the highbrow, from tennis and they're all whites playing on grass, to ultimate fighting. And I don't know if anyone's a fan of that quasi sport. It's sort of morally indefensible, but as a journalist, it's really terrific to cover, and everything in between. I put that Yao Ming picture up there for John Huizinga's benefit. He'll tell you why later, I suspect. But when people say, what do you like about sports? Sports just have this terrific, this sort of power to explain, this sort of explanatory power. And when people say, what do you like? I said, I sort of like sports and. So I like sports and economics, sports and psychology, sports and the law. I think sports is this great prism to sort of explore these other issues. And frankly, for readers, sometimes it's a way to sort of sugarcoat the material, and everybody likes sports, so it's an easy way to, who knew about antitrust before, 5 or 6 weeks ago? But it's sports for me are a great way to sort of explain and explore other topics, but it goes the reverse way too. And that as much as we hear these cliches about sports are a metaphor for life, a lot of what we see in sports is just life expressed in a different context. A lot of what goes on a field and during games and decisions to draft players last night, it's really just basic human decision making. So those are some of my interests. And I joined as Siddharth was saying, boyhood friend of mine, Toby Moskowitz, who I knew was the guy we'd sort of get in trouble and, drive around Indiana and try to get into underage parties. He went on to become a fairly distinguished economist. In my eyes, he's still the 16-year-old kid I was friends with, but he's now a colleague of John's, who's a finance professor at the University of Chicago. And he's sort of the inverse. I'm a sports guy that likes economics, and he's an economics guy. He's an economist who likes sports, and we got together a few years ago, and we were talking about this, and we were saying that as often as sports is sort of dismissed in some quarters as it's diversion and it's fun and it's escapism, the truth is, and as Ward was saying as well, sports really has this huge power to explain, and the data, especially recently in recent years, is just phenomenal. You sort of think about sports and you think about innumerable data sets, whether it's wins and losses or something more complex, as we'll hear later on today. You've got all these teams that are competing on a very, very flat. We have. It's not as though the 49ers or the Raiders can have a bad season and they're going to compete next year with double the staff. I mean, everyone's got the same number of players. They're using the same. They're using the same rules. It's not as though some teams play with smaller hoops than others. In some leagues, there's even a cap on how much money you can spend. So all of these elements are controlled. You have all this amazing data, and then at the end, the results are the results are pretty unambiguous. Nobody's arguing that the Texas Rangers really won the World Series. I mean, the scoreboard says what happens at the end of the day, and that's pretty much that. So sports really, from a data perspective, are a great way to attack some of these issues. So in any event, I was talking to Toby, and we were sort of talking about all this, and we said, you know what, why don't we try and have some fun with this? Why don't we sort of marry our interests? And so we collaborated on this book, Scorecasting, which first rule of publishing is the authors don't get to choose the title. But Scorecasting was the name of our book, and Toby's colleagues with Steve Levitt at Chicago, who was the economist behind Freakonomics, so we sort of used that as a model and worked together and sort of tried to use behavioral economics and investing principles and psychology and all this data out there to just sort of look at sports a little bit differently. We looked at the Cubs' futility. That's sort of we were both long-suffering Cubs fans, but we looked at things like home field, home court advantage, and we looked at whether teams from cold climates really play poorly when they have to go to warm climates, and we just tried to have fun with it. And one of the topics we looked at was this notion of whistle swallowing. So everybody you even could have watched the NBA games last night and seen evidence of it. But like a lot of fans, we sort of had this assumption that games are called differently, and when it gets later in games, when it's a tight game, the refs have this propensity to swallow the whistle. And I think as sports fans, we sort of intuitively, we sense that, but we wanted to see whether that was true or not. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Before I get to that, I want to play this audio, though. I was talking about something a bit related to this with a gentleman who works up the road. Let me see if we can get this to work here. But I was talking about competition with Brian Wilson a few months ago, and we're all Giants fans. So Brian Wilson is he's the wacky. He's a wacky relief pitcher who dyes his beard and wears crazy shoes and has this alter ego. But in talking to the guy, he's the most rational, thoughtful, sort of self-possessed athlete I've spoken to in a long time. So I want to play this clip for you guys, and the audio is just terrible, but I figure the authenticity makes it worthwhile. You'd rather hear him speak than me paraphrase. So I'm going to play this. And so this is a topic we were talking a little bit about pressure and how he confronts pressure. What is he thinking when he goes up there and he's got a lead to protect in the bottom of the ninth. So let's hope this works. And then.
Pressure is what you make it. A million people have said that before, but it's true. You look at a game, you go in, you pitch 9th inning, you lose by 10, you strike out the sides. Of course you will, because you're losing by 10 runs. You go in the game with a 1-run lead, why does it change? It doesn't change. The only thing that changes is your view of the inning, the amount of pressure you put on yourself. Next thing you know, you're 3-0 against a leadoff hitter. Next hitter is division leader in homers. And now you start thinking about that. You get wound up. You go out there, you get up the leadoff double in one game. Who cares? You look back at the guy, look at the second, you tell yourself, you're not going anywhere. Don't even think about taking a lead. I'm going to pick you off and get nasty. None of that's happening. You're not scoring. Because the starter worked too damn hard to preserve this win. The guy at third base, the home run in the 6th to get this going, and the city's going nuts right now. So settle down and get this over with. It is that simple. Do your job. It's like gambling. I don't like gambling. You're playing blackjack and you're rooting against the dealer. You're going to lose. Oh, I want you to bust so I can win. Or you can just hope that you get 21.
Sorry, was that at all remotely audible? So I will paraphrase that. He basically said, look, when you've got pressure, you just go up there, do your damn job. You don't worry about these distractions. You attack the situation. You get nasty. He doesn't like gambling because he wants to go out there. He wants to get 21. He doesn't want to depend on the dealer busting. He doesn't want to worry about what anyone else is doing. And it sounds, it's great advice. It sounds very rational. This guy's in competitive sports. It sounds like a pretty good plan. But it really runs counter to general human behavior. It sounds great when he says it, but it's sort of at odds with the way humans behave. And we have this. Let me see if I can. In behavioral psychology, we have this term omission bias. And basically, what's behind omission bias is that we sort of have this. This is crassly put. If there are any behavioral psychologists, you can malign me later for dumbing this down too much. But we basically have this sort of internal. This risk analysis department. And in a lot of situations, we think it's preferable to sort of remove ourselves. That acts of omission are somehow less blameworthy. They're somehow preferable to acts of commission. And we have this omission bias, and it comes up in all sorts of contexts. This is sort of the famous omission bias example where the flu epidemic's coming through the village, and it's going to kill 10 out of 10,000 children. So, 1 out of 1,000 children is going to die from this. But the good news is there's this vaccine. Administer the vaccine and you'll be safe from the virus. The only bad news is that the vaccine has side effects, and it causes 5 deaths out of 10,000. So we have one death in 2,000. So the question becomes, as parents, do you vaccinate? And you look at this rationally, and the answer is, of course you vaccinate. You're going to have your kids' chances of passing away. And yet when this is posed to most parents, they don't vaccinate. And the reason is this omission bias. That somehow, if God forbid you're one of those kids who's one in the 5 in 10,000, and you're the parent who decided to vaccinate by sort of entering the equation, by committing this act, somehow that is seen as more blameworthy than if nature strikes. So here's an example where basically you're not optimizing your child's chances of survival because of this omission bias. And we see this in all sorts of different contexts. This is sort of another famous example. I was going to say this for Coach Gould if he was here, but we're playing tennis and your opponent has a known sort of seafood allergy. And if you poison him and you serve him lobster and sneak that into his dinner, that's pretty bad. But if you see him, he's eating a California roll and it's one of those rare sushi places that uses real seafood, and you see him eating it, somehow that's less blameworthy. Same result either way, right? The guy's going to get really sick or worse, but somehow we think that poisoning him is much worse than just sort of removing ourselves this act of omission where we let him eat the rancid seafood. And we see this, again, one of the few things I remember from law school is this duty to rescue. You see your freshman roommate and you hated him and you're in the Stanford pool and you dunk him in the water and drown him, you're in big, big trouble. If you walk by the Stanford pool and he's flailing his arms and can't swim and you decide not to rescue him, the consequences are different. There is no duty to rescue in the law in a situation like that. Same in medicine. First thing you learn when you go to med school is this Hippocratic view, do no harm. It's not affirmatively do some good. And think about this sort of in investing too. If you're a fund manager, when do you really get in trouble? Is it when you miss out on the Google IPO, this act of omission, or is it when you invest your client's money in a dog of a stock? It may ultimately cost them more money, this act of omission. But I think if you talk to most fund managers, they'd say, look, when I really get in trouble is when I make a bad move, and they sort of adjust their behavior accordingly. So sort of keeping all that in mind, we wanted to apply this to officials, so this notion of whistle swallowing. And we sort of had this idea that when refs swallow the whistle when they decline to make these calls, this is another expression of this omission bias. And we talked to an NBA ref, and he sort of confirmed it off the bat. He said, look, first thing you learn is that there are 4 kinds of calls. There are right calls, there are right no calls, there are wrong calls, and there are wrong no calls. And obviously, you want to be right all the time. And I should probably point out, I saw another one of the presentations today is also about bias in referees. We all pick on the refs, and none of us think we can play basketball like Kobe, but we all think we can make judgments better than referees, and we all think our vision is better. But the truth is, referees and officials do a terrific job, and empirically, they get upset. I mean, it's uncanny the calls they actually get right. They really are professionals, but they're human and they make mistakes. And when they do make mistakes, I'll pose this to you guys. What do you think is worse? It's there's a goaltend and you don't call it, or there isn't a goaltend and you do call it. I mean, I think you get in. When you miss the goaltending call, it's bad. But when you call the phantom call, that's when you really get in deep trouble. And that informs what these officials are doing. So we wanted to look at this sort of sport by sport. And the first sport we looked at was baseball. And what we found was that the strike zone changes pretty dramatically, as you can see from this, based on the pitch count. That it's 3-0, 3 balls and no strikes. And we're talking about a conventional at bat. This isn't, not talking about intentional walks, but it's 3-0. And the umpires behind the plate, he doesn't want to get in this situation. He wants the batter to swing and miss. He wants the batter to put the ball in play. Even the batter to get plunked. He doesn't want to make that ball 4 call unless he has to. So on a 3-0 count, you can see from this, the strike zone suddenly becomes, you've got to go nuke Lelouch and throw a pitch over the backstop to get that. I'm exaggerating, but the strike zone gets much larger on a 3-0 pitch. On an 0-2 pitch, you sort of have the reverse, where the umpire, he doesn't want to punch the guy out. If he swings and misses, it's okay. If the guy puts the ball in play, better. But he'd rather remove himself from the situation. So on an 0-2 pitch, you've really got to throw the ball down the middle of the plate to get that call third strike. And I think, there's some baseball fans in the crowd here, but I think when you watch a game, intuitively you see that you see a 3-0 pitch, and